Hey guys, Brian Schultz here with Ep.1 Kayak, and welcome to a brand new version of our small boat camping series where I show you how to camp efficiently out of skin-on-frame kayaks and canoes. Although honestly, most of this information would apply to anyone who's interested in learning how to pack lighter and faster and go camping without sacrificing too much comfort. Now, I originally made this series about 10 years ago and I put it up on my website where it ended up being a lot more popular than I thought it would. But over time, gear options have changed, I've changed some of the ways that I do things, and most importantly, we've gotten a lot better at making videos. So I figured this would be a great time to do a refresh on this whole project, and the only thing I ask is that you hit that like and subscribe button, and if you get something out of this series, think about building one of our skin-on-frame boats, or maybe buying your next piece of paddling gear from us. All right, so getting into this, my own background is that I've been building and teaching people how to build skin-on-frame boats for over 20 years, and I've also been a lightweight camper since before that was even popular. So when I first started building skin-on-frame boats, I wasn't nearly as worried as other people seemed to be about being able to fit what I needed to go camping. And then as I started designing skin-on-frame boats, I actually built my boats to make the whole packing and camping process even easier. So what I'm going to do in this series is we're going to start out in just a few minutes here by showing you all the basic components of my camping kit, and then I'm going to pack one of my skin-on-frame boats in front of you so you can see how this whole thing comes together. And then after that, in subsequent videos, we're going to unpack every part of that kit, and I'm going to show you the products that I choose and why I choose them, with a specific emphasis on getting the most value for your money when you're building out your small boat camping kit. So for the packing demonstration, we're going to be using my LPB kayak design. This is the longer and narrower of my two modern kayaks. It's a very fitness and speed oriented boat that is 22 inches wide and 16 foot 3 inches long. And the reason I'm using this one as opposed to my F1 for our packing demonstration is because this boat is the harder of the two to pack. And then you know that anything other than this is just going to be easier. Okay, so I've gone ahead and set myself up exactly like I would if I was going on a week-long camping trip. I've got one IKEA bag with all of my paddling gear, and I've got another IKEA bag with all of my camping gear. And one of the golden rules of my system is that if everything you need to camp for a week does not fit into a standard size IKEA bag, you have too much stuff and you need to pack a little bit lighter. Now, as far as what's in this IKEA bag, I've gone ahead and handicapped myself a little bit further by just bringing my normal car camping stuff as opposed to bringing my ultralight backpacking stuff. And once again, that's just to show you guys that I'm not trying to trick you by using a really big boat and then really small gear to make it look like it's easier to camp in a skin-on-frame kayak than it actually is. So once again, this represents kind of a worst case scenario. So just taking a look at the basic items here. First up, we've got my tent, and this tent is an absolute beast. This is the Sling Fin Indus. I can't wait to show you guys this in a later video. It is designed to be super durable, but that also makes it a bit heavier. Now, if you wanted to go with something a little bit lighter than this, you could go with kind of a standard backpacking tent. This one weighs 3.5 pounds. And then if you wanted to go even lighter than that, assuming you've got trees, you could go with something like this jungle hammock here, and this one only weighs 2 pounds. Or if you really wanted to pack light and you don't have mosquitoes, you could just get a simple silicone nylon tarp like this one right here. This weighs 15 ounces. So lots of options for tents, just depending on your circumstances and how much you feel like carrying. Okay, moving on. You can see that most of the items in here are packed in these 13-liter lightweight dry sacks. Now, we are actually going to end up packing all of this gear into a larger dry bag before we slide it into the boat. But one of the main rules of small boat camping is that if something absolutely has to stay dry, you need to be double dry bagging it. So in this one here, this is meant to simulate 3.5 or 4 days of food. This would normally weigh about 7 pounds. And then I've got an identical one, which is also meant to simulate another 3.5 to 4 days of food, and this would also weigh 7 pounds if it was full of food. Now, next thing we've got here is my clothes. I don't tend to pack super lightweight, fancy camping clothes. These are just the normal clothes I wear in my regular life with a couple of additional things thrown in. This is about 4.5 pounds, I think, right now. It could be lighter if you want to pack fancy gear. And then here I've got my sleeping bag. The sleeping bag weighs 2¾ pounds. It's a 20-degree down bag. But if you wanted to spend an additional $400, you could actually get this down to 1.5 pounds and it would pack even smaller. And then I've got my sleeping pad right here. This is a fairly substantial, durable, inflatable sleeping pad. This also weighs just a little bit over 2 pounds. And then I've got my cooking gear here, which is backpacker weight cooking gear. I've got a titanium pot inside of here and an alcohol stove. This doesn't weigh very much at all. And then I've just got a standard bottle from the grocery store that I dumped the water out of, and I filled it with alcohol for my alcohol stove. And then finally here, I've got what I call my day bag or my ditch bag. And this has got everything I need to have access to during the day when I'm out on the water, plus emergency gear in case for some reason I had to abandon my kayak, I lost all the rest of this gear. The idea is that I could survive for several days and get to help with just what's inside this bag. So this bag normally sits between my legs, and you can see that this is a much more heavy duty dry bag because everything is just going to be in one bag in this case. And then very last thing, I've got a water bag. Now, whether you need to carry a lot of water just depends on your circumstances. This happens to be the 10-liter MSR dromedary bag. In certain desert camping situations, I've carried 2 or even 3 of these. Now, as far as how we're going to pack all this stuff into the kayak, what I've got here is 2 combination float/gear bags from Track Kayaks. This is their Expedition Series bag, which are actually a little bit too small, but they are a lot more durable than their other style of bag. And there's advantages to both bags, so I'm gonna make a completely separate video so you can understand the differences between them, and also I'll talk about sea socks in that same video. But for today, we're gonna go with this smaller size bag here. Once again, I'm handicapping myself a little bit just so you guys know I'm not trying to trick you by using ultralight gear, a big boat, and a really big bag. So anyways, starting out here, we're gonna pack the bow bag with our tent, our sleeping bag, our sleeping mat, and our clothes and any of our personal effects. So starting out with the tent, if I'm using a small backpacking tent like this, it's easy because I can just slide this all the way to the tip right here, and then I can start stuffing stuff in behind it. Unfortunately, if I'm using a really big burly tent like this one, this expedition grade tent, I'm gonna wanna unpack this. And I'm gonna put the rain fly portion of it in the rear bag, and I'm gonna put the actual tent portion of it here in the bow of this bag. So once again, if you're going with a regular backpacking tent, you probably don't need to split it apart like that. I'm just doing this because I have a pretty heavy duty expedition tent right now. So let's go ahead and slide this in. Now, if you're wondering why I don't have a separate dry bag around the tent, it's because if your tent gets wet, it's usually not the end of the world. The things that I'm really careful to dry bag are my down sleeping bag and my clothes. So I'm gonna push this all the way to the front here. Next, I'm gonna put in my sleeping bag. Something I forgot to point out earlier is anytime you're packing a dry bag for camping on the water, you wanna make sure that it's a little bit puffy. You don't wanna try to compress all the air out of it like you do when you're backpacking, because if this ends up submerged for some reason and it's got negative pressure inside of it, that's gonna suck water through all of the seams basically. Whereas if it's a little bit poofy, the pressure of the water is just gonna blow air out of it and it's less likely to get the contents wet. So I'm gonna stuff this in over here. And then off to the side of it, up in this area, I'm gonna put my sleeping mat. And then finally, I've got my bag with my clothes in it. And then we're just gonna slide this in sideways at the top right here. And then you can see on this particular bag, this has a waterproof zipper. So you just have to zip it closed like that. and then you can clip it like this, and that'll help make this a little bit narrower. It'll make it slide into the boat a little bit easier. Now, the other style of bag has a different type of closure. I'll show you that in a future video, where basically you roll it up like you would a dry bag. It's not quite as airtight as these guys are right here, but that other style of bag is cheaper, and it does have a little bit more room, which makes this process a little bit easier. All right, now moving on to the stern bag. If you're building one of our larger size kayaks, and especially if you're building the touring modification that has the raised back deck, you can actually pack this full of gear exactly like you do the bow bag and then slide it into the boat afterwards. However, for most of our standard medium size and smaller designs, it's just a lot easier to pack this in the boat. So first thing I do is I'll get half of one of my break apart paddles or a stick if there's one sitting around, and I'll stick it inside here, and I'll use it to push this into the end of the back of the boat. And then after that, I can just pull up my back band at the back of the cockpit, and I can start loading this full. Like I mentioned earlier, if you have a super burly tent like the one that I do, you might have to split it between the front and the back bag. Although honestly, if you were going out with 2 people, which is the only reason you would have a tent this big, one person could carry half the tent, one person could carry the other. And then if you're just carrying a standard backpacker tent, none of this is gonna matter, and you won't even have to do this second half. So I'm gonna take the tarp for my tent. I'm gonna push it all the way into the end, just like I did in the bow bag. And then next, I usually grab my camp stove and my fuel. Make sure that however you're carrying fuel, if you're gonna put it in a dry bag, you can absolutely trust that container, or it is alcohol fuel. So I'm gonna put in my stove and my cook kit here. And then in front of that, right in this area here, that's where I'm gonna put my food. Once again, 2 13-liter bags packed full of food. Normally these weigh 7 pounds a piece, and that's gonna cover you for about a week of being able to eat for one person. And then as far as how these are gonna fit best, it just depends on how you packed your food. Sometimes I go side by side, sometimes I go one in front of the other. Slide one in, slide another one in sideways. And then I can just go ahead and zip this closed or roll it closed, depending on what style of bag you have. Clip it together. Now, before we pack all this stuff into the kayak, if you're curious how much these bags weigh right now, I've gone ahead and set up a scale. So for the bow bag here, which has about 2/3 of my super heavy duty tent, which is equivalent to the same weight as a normal backpacking tent, also has my sleeping bag, my sleeping mat, and my personal clothes. That comes in at just about 16 pounds right here. And if I had a slightly lighter sleeping mat and sleeping bag, I could get that down to 14 or even 13 pounds if I wanted to. Now for the stern bag, this has the other half of my heavy duty tent, my cooking gear, my fuel, and also all my food in it. Although this stern bag is actually full of towels, not actual food. So the real weight on this bag would be more like 18 to 20 pounds if it was actually packed for a week. So overall packed weight between these two bags ends up being about 35 pounds. And I feel like that's a really good target to shoot for. I mean, if you already have really nice ultralight backpacking gear, feel free to bring that with you. It's just gonna make these bags even lighter and easier to pack. But for me, I'm usually looking for medium weight gear because it ends up being less expensive and more durable. And keeping your overall kit around 35 pounds is actually gonna make your boat paddle a lot nicer because it's not gonna be so heavy and so sluggish, especially if you're pairing this with a skin-on frame kayak where your kit weighs 35 pounds and your boat weighs 35 pounds. And now you might be out there touring in a boat and kit combo that weighs as much as a standard plastic sea kayak, which is going to make you faster and less tired at the end of the day. Also, just one more tip before we head over to the kayak. For these particular bags, I found that this flap in the front tends to catch on the ribs. So what I like to do is just get a little piece of duct tape and then fold this in half like this. I'm folding this upward. And then you can just tape it over like this. And that's going to make it way easier to slide in and out of the ends of your boat. All right, now coming over to the kayak, I've gone ahead and taken the floor mat out. This isn't necessary if you have the medium size F1 or larger, or the larger size LPBs, but for the smaller size F1 and for the medium size LPB, if you take the floor mat out, it's just going to allow you to slide your bags in and out a little bit easier, and then you can put the floor mat back in when you're finished. So first thing I'm going to do is pack the bow, and I'm going to start by grabbing my foot braces and pulling them all the way back and locking them down. And then if you have folding pump clips mounted underneath the deck right here, make sure you fold those up so that way when you push the float bag in, you don't end up breaking off those clips. So next thing, I'm going to grab the bag. And something I want to mention is that if you load this bag so it's floppy in the middle, like there's a floppy spot, that's going to be a lot harder to push in. So take your time and learn how to pack this so it ends up being fairly stable, because that way when you slide it in here, it won't get caught. So I'm just going to push this forward. And in the medium and larger size F1s and in the larger LPBs, this will just slide effortlessly all the way to the bow. But for these smaller size boats, it's probably going to hang up on the foot braces, and you just need to take a second, work it around the foot braces with your hands. And then after that, it'll just slide really easy all the way forward. And then once you've pushed it as far forward as you can, you want to go ahead and release the foot braces, push them forward, lock them down, and those foot braces are going to lock that bag in place. That way it can't come floating out of there if you end up in a rescue situation. And then another thing that helps to lock the bag in place is to use the inflation stem to top this off with a little bit of air, because this is also a float bag. Just keep in mind that if you're paddling on a really hot day, you don't want to inflate this thing as much as you possibly can, because you could potentially split a seam on the bag, especially if you're using the other style, which is a little bit more lightly constructed. And then you always want to make sure you have access to the stem from your paddling position if you need to let some air out. So in that case, I usually just route it down here and right about there. And then I can put my floor mat in right here. Now, moving on to the back of the boat, like I mentioned earlier, it's pretty common to just push the bag in first and then load the gear through the cockpit and then close it up. However, if you get really good at packing the stern bag, sometimes you can just slide it into the back exactly like you did with the front. So I haven't tried this yet with this size kayak. We'll see how I do. First thing I'm going to do is lift up the back band. And then I'm going to take my bag here, push it in, and right about there is where it usually gets stuck, but we're going to see if it'll push in. And actually, that went surprisingly well. So I got lucky. I must have packed this really well, because this slid all the way back to about this point right here. And that's perfect, because that gives me just enough space back here where if I need to haul water, I can grab one or two of these MSR 10-liter dromedary bags, and I can fit them behind the seat right here, push the back band down, and then my water is sitting as low as possible in the boat, so it's making it even more stable, and it's as centered as possible in the boat so it doesn't disturb the trim or mess up the performance. Now, I do want to mention a couple things. The first one, if you're going to be putting a water bag back here, make sure you have at least something tying it or clipping it into the boat. So if you end up in a rescue situation, your water doesn't float away. And then also, these little spouts right here, if they catch on something, can pop open and all of your water can slowly leak out. So just make sure that when you're packing this into the back of your boat, you're watching this little spout to make sure that it doesn't pop open. So this goes right here. And then finally, I usually bring flip-flops with me because I like flip-flops, but I think most people like hiking sandals for their footwear. So for my footwear when I'm not in the boat, I usually put this stuff back here on either side. So I've got one sandal here, one sandal here. Once again, if you don't want to lose it, you might want to find some way to tie it into the frame. And then finally, I'll grab one of the 2 IKEA bags that I brought all my gear when I was packing, because these are absolutely great for moving your gear around camp and also packing your gear to and from the water when you're loading your kayak. And then you can just stick this right back there. And then very last thing, if you took your floor mat out when you were packing your boat, now is when you're going to want to put it back in. And then finally, once you get in your boat, you can grab your ditch bag, put it between your legs right here, and this is going to have extra clothes, fire starter, maybe a space blanket, a communication device, first aid, everything you need to survive if the worst thing happens and you end up losing your kayak. So that's the packing process. And then just for fun here, I want to show you guys the unpacking process, because this is where I feel like things get even easier than camping out of a boat with bulkheads and hatches. So basically, when I pull up to the beach, first thing I'm going to do is grab that IKEA bag right behind the seat and open it up. And then everything that's loose is going to go in the IKEA bag. So I got my ditch bag, throw my shoes in, grab my water, and then I'm going to set this off to the side. And then for the bags and the ends, all I've got to do is lift up the back band, reach in here, pull out the stern bag, and then I can reach in here and pull the foot braces back, pull out the bow bag, and then all I got to do is just throw one of these bags over one shoulder, throw the other bag over the other shoulder, walk up to camp, come back down to the beach, pick up my boat in one hand, pick up the IKEA bag in the other, walk back up to camp, and I'm pretty much done as far as unpacking the boat. So that's how I pack one of my skin-on-frame kayaks for a week-long camping trip. And as you can see, it's just not that big of a deal. I wasn't using my largest boat, and I definitely wasn't using my smallest camping gear, and all that stuff fit into the ends just fine. So as long as you're packing a moderately sized kit, it's really not that hard to camp out of these boats. And if you're wondering how these packing techniques relate to other kinds of boats, if you learn how to pack like this, that's going to make your regular sea kayak camping, where you have a lot more space, more enjoyable, because you're not going to be overloading your boat. And of course, you can bring all this same stuff in a canoe or a small rowboat. And once again, you're not going to be tempted to overload it. So I think that's pretty much it for this video. In the upcoming videos, we're going to be taking apart all these bags that we just packed, and I'm going to show you the specific products that I bring with me and why I choose them, including substitutions for different circumstances. And also, if you are an experienced sea kayak or canoeing camper, I would really invite you to leave your own advice in the comments here, because even though I've been doing this for a long time and I have a lot of knowledge, there's a bunch of other people out there that have great ideas as well, and it would be great if the comment section of these videos also served as a resource for people. So anyways, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. As usual, if you like this video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Also, make sure you check out our website, capefalconkayaks.com, where we have skin-on-frame building video courses, plan sets, and various free skin-on-frame resources. You can also find us on Instagram at capefalconbuilds, where we post photos and videos of whatever we're working on in the shop or whatever we're testing out on the water. And you can find that same content on the Cape Falcon Kayak Facebook page as well. So that's it for now. Take care. Be safe on the water. I will see you next time.